The sound of running water filled the kitchen as I stood by the sink. My hands submerged in the warm, soapy water. The house was unusually quiet tonight. My husband had stepped out to pick up something from the store, leaving me alone for a little while. It was a rare moment of peace. A chance to breathe in the silence and enjoy the mundane routine of cleaning up after a long day. I let out a soft sigh, letting the warmth of the water seep into my skin as I rinsed off the soap from a plate. The rhythmic moment was almost soothing. Welcome distraction from the usual whirlwind of my thoughts. Outside, the streetlights cast a dim glow through the window, and the hum of distant cars reminded me how late it was getting. Then I felt a presence behind me, close. My body tensed instinctively before my mind even had the chance to register what was happening. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and my breath hitched. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The familiar scent of his cologne, deep and woody unmistakably, him filled my senses, my husband's friend. My grip on the wet plate tightened slightly, but I forced myself to keep scrubbing, to pretend like I wasn't suddenly aware of every breath I took of the way my pulse had started to hammer against my ribs. "What are you doing?" My voice came out steady, but it felt forced. His breath was warm, too, near my neck. Just watching a nervous chuckle slipped past my lips, though there was nothing funny about the way his presence lingered. "Behind me, you're awfully quiet." "For someone who just came in," I said. "Didn't want to disturb you," he replied. The weight of his words settled between us, thick and unspoken. I willed myself to keep scrubbing, to act like this was nothing, that I wasn't hyper, aware of how close he was standing, of how the heat of his body radiated against my back. But then he shifted, and his presence became impossible to ignore. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch his expression in my peripheral vision. His eyes were locked on the dark, with something unreadable. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, like he knew something I didn't. I exhaled slowly. "Where's my husband?" I asked. He shrugged, stepping back just a little still. "Thought I'd keep you company," something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the way they lingered, the way his gaze never wavered. I followed, willing my body to relax. "Well, I don't need company, just finishing up here," I said, expecting him to take the hint and leave. But instead he leaned against the counter, watching me with an intensity that made my fingers tremble against the plate in my hand. "You always work this hard?" he asked, his voice low. I forced a small smile, trying to keep things light. "Somebody has to clean up after dinner." His smirk deepened. "I don't think he appreciates you enough." My breath caught, and my hand stilled. "Excuse me?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly. "I'm just saying he leaves you alone too much." I didn't respond. Couldn't. The air between us felt charged now, as if we had just crossed an invisible line that neither of us could step back from. I turned my attention back to the dishes, focusing on the feel of the water, on the sound of it rushing down the drain, trying to drown out the tension building in my chest. But then he took a step closer, not touching me. Not yet, but close enough that I felt it. An invisible pressure pressed in on me, making it impossible to ignore the way his presence filled the space. I clenched, my jaw gripping the edge of the sink. "Think you should go?" A long pause, then finally I heard him shift, stepping back slightly. "All right," he said, his tone unreadable. "I'll see you later." He walked away, his footsteps echoing through the quiet house only. When I heard the front door close, did I let out the breath I'd been holding. But even as I stood there staring at the soapy water, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. And I knew deep down that this wasn't the last time I would feel his presence behind me. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house, but even as I stood there gripping the counter, my pulse refused to settle. My breathing was and even my body still tense from the lingering heat of his presence, I thought that, was it that he had walked away, and I could shake off whatever just happened. But then barely a few minutes later I heard footsteps approaching again, slow, deliberate. I turned half expecting to see my husband. Maybe he had forgotten. Something, but it wasn't him. It was Himmy. Husband's friend stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and steady as they locked onto mine. I swallowed hard. "Why are you still here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped inside, shutting the door behind him with an unsettling ease. "I forgot. Something," he finally said, though his voice held none of the casual tone I was used to. I licked my lips suddenly, feeling trapped between the counter and the weight of his gaze. "You should go." His smirk returned lazy and knowing. Should I tense? Silence filled the air between as he moved closer, slow and measured, until he was just a breath away. "You felt it too, didn't you?" His voice was low, almost teasing, but there was something deeper beneath it. Something raw. Something dangerous. I shook my head, willing my body to ignore the shiver that ran through me. "This is wrong." He exhaled a quiet laugh. "Is it my chest?" Rose and fell, with uneven breaths. He wasn't touching me, not yet. But the way his body hovered near mine made my skin burn with awareness. "Your husband trusts me, you know," he murmured, his breath fanning against my cheek. Maybe a little. Too much my fingers curled against. The countertop, my resolve slipping by. Desk in the air was thick, suffocating, wrapping around us like a secret waiting to be uncovered. His hand lifted, brushing lightly against my arm. A mere whisper of contact, but it sent a jolt through my spine. My body betrayed me. Responding to the closeness to the tension simmering between us, "Tell me to leave," he said softly, though his tone held a challenge. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. His fingertips trailed down my wrist, feather-light teasing. "That's what?" I thought a sharp inhale filled my lungs. I should stop this. I had to stop this. But my body had already made the decision. For me. His lips brushed dangerously, close to mine, hovering, waiting. Then the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered. The moment, we both froze. Reality came crashing down, harsh and unforgiving. I shoved him back, my breath shaky. "Go." Now his eyes darkened, but he didn't argue. He took a step back, his gaze flickering over me one last time before he turned and disappeared through the back door. My hands trembled as I pressed them against my chest, trying to slow the rapid beat of my heart. I turned back to the sink, forcing myself to breathe, to forget moments. Later, I heard the front door open. My husband's voice carried through the house, casual and unaware. "Hey babe, got everything we needed?" I forced a smile, turning to face him as he stepped into the kitchen, setting the bags down on the counter, his arms wrapped around my waist, pressing a quick kiss to my temple. "You look a little flush," I swallowed, hard nodding quickly. "Yeah, just the heat from the water." He chuckled. "I told you you worked too hard."